Hello everyone! Today we're going to talk about the huge problems on the front line. Problems for those who are already there and problems for those who don't want to be there. Let's go, subscribe, and let's see what's going on there. First, I'll show you a video that demonstrates a way to leave hospitable Ukraine and get somewhere inhospitable, far away, a place that's talked about so much, where they say Ukrainians have it so bad. There, they suffer so much, they clean toilets, and in general, everything is terrible there. Among my acquaintances, who ended up here, both with money and without money, everyone somehow settled in just fine. Everyone is working, some have businesses, some have regular jobs, and more or less everyone has money. Definitely a lot more than they had in Ukraine. Well, as for those who still haven't made it here, abroad, I mean from that damned homeland, they just haven't gotten here yet. There's this one guy, an enterprising guy, showing how you can get here. And by the way, this is not a joke. Subscribe to the channel, don't forget. To be continued. So, as they say, the beautiful far away, don't be cruel to me. For this guy, Romania was this guy's beautiful far away place. And yes, he ended up exactly where he needed to be. They didn't mobilize him there, didn't deport him, as far as I remember. Everything turned out fine. The main thing here is that our border guards don't suddenly start setting off fireworks, or worse, start shooting. There was already a similar video, I think, where a guy like that on a similar device, it's called paraglider, I believe, or something like that, was flying between mountains. And suddenly the border guards started giving him a salute, shooting at him with assault rifles. He survived, thank God, made it across the border, but it was really intense. Next, as we have here, Ukrainian sources are saying that there's a huge problem at the front. Russian forces are advancing toward the last strongholds of Ukraine in the Donbas, the last strongholds of Ukraine in the Donbas. And this is being reported by Union, which is always accused of having all sorts of biases and so on. But here, this is what they're writing. The terrain, we're told, still favors the defenders in the east, where Russian forces have recently made their greatest advances. Same old story all over again. If the armed forces of Ukraine do not send reinforcements to defend the neighboring cities of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, Russian troops could very well reach the outskirts of these cities by the end of the year, as several unit commanders told the Latvian publication Baltic Sentinel. We're fighting in this area. Why not report this to domestic publications or fellow citizens? In other words, just citizens, not domestic or foreign, since there can't be non-domestic citizens. Is absolutely impossible to understand. Well, if you have such problems, then just state them. No, instead, some major Latvian publications, apparently with 300 readers, they state the following. On certain sections of the front, it is already beginning to slowly collapse. There simply aren't enough forces to stop them, said an officer of the Ukrainian brigade that has been fighting for many years in the Kramatorsk and Slavyansk area. In his opinion, there is a real risk that Russian troops could reach the cities by the end of the year. If this doesn't happen by then, it might even happen sooner. The Italian commander from Britain. The brigades fighting from the Slavyansk direction generally share the same opinion. Their attacks, meaning the Russian armed forces, come one after another. That's why they're advancing. Previously, the offensives weren't this intense. A high-ranking Ukrainian staff officer also admitted that Russian troops could very well reach Kramatorsk and Slavyansk by the end of the year. Russia is concentrating its forces there. If we organize our operations properly, we can stop them. The fate of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk has not yet been decided. Meanwhile, Zelensky is already taking pictures, snapping selfies right in front of the Zaporizhia city still itself. Well, you remember how the previous ones ended, but he is very persistent, as we can see, very confident in himself and keeps taking selfies. What's most interesting is that there's a video where he was speaking right here in this same spot, and suddenly a truck materialized behind him with some kind of vehicle in the back. Most likely it's an edit, of course, but overall it looks really interesting.
Then they also tell us that absolutely all bridges to talks have been burned, but again, by this talented leader. And now Putin declares that nothing good will come of it. And that escalation will happen precisely in Ukraine. Escalation will hit civilians first and foremost. And only then the military, as usual. We're told that Putin is preparing for an escalation of the war in Ukraine. Negotiations have reached a deadlock. According to 3 sources close to the Kremlin, Russia is preparing to escalate attacks on Ukraine after concluding that peace agreement negotiations have reached a deadlock.
What does this involve? Intensifying powerful conventional ballistic missile strikes, including on the center of the capital, as well as infrastructure facilities in other Ukrainian cities.
All negotiation mechanisms have essentially collapsed, and both warring sides have returned to square one. Putin will not stop the war under economic pressure during attacks on Russian oil refineries and logistics networks. Moscow plans to strike at the most sensitive sectors of the Ukrainian economy. Well, in fact, it is already striking. And food products, for example, in those same chains like Silpo or others, are simply disappearing. Yes, there are signs left saying that the enemy destroyed another truck or another warehouse where food was stored. That's why you can't buy this product today. But who feels better because of this? I have to say, no one. It's absolutely natural.
Now, what happens next at the front? We have a gray zone on Ukrainian military maps, which shows the battlefield in real time. The gray zone starts 4 kilometers east of Kramatorsk.
That's nothing. It indicates that Russian soldiers have already entered this area. If Ukrainian troops fail to detect, locate, and eliminate them, Russian forces may gradually build up their strength there and move closer to the cities.
This doesn't mean that Kramatorsk is inevitably at risk yet, but honestly, it's a strange assumption, especially considering that Russian forces are already just 4 kilometers from Kramatorsk.
But alright, the hills outside the cities remain under Ukrainian control, which gives Ukrainian drone operators a greater range and better positions. But if these heights are also captured, then nothing good can be expected. In addition, Ukraine is under heavy pressure.
To the south of Kramatorsk, where Russian troops have effectively taken control of most of Kostiantynivka, and the city is located about 20 kilometers from Kramatorsk.
As the crow flies. One of the commanders says that the situation is constantly bad, but it will take Russian troops a few more months to capture the entire city.
At the moment, he says, it doesn't seem like the Russian armed forces will be able to advance quickly from the direction of Kostiantynivka, said Senior Sergeant of the Drone Battalion. At the same time, Russian troops managed to transfer their own drone operators to Kostiantynivka, constantly shifting the strike zone. Well, but journalists believe that it cannot be ruled out that, on the initiative of the new military commander Dropatov, Ukrainian forces may launch a successful counterattack to strengthen the defense of Kramatorsk.
But overall, it all sounds interesting here. Not bad, in light of the fact that we're being told there's simply nothing left to pay with. For example, here's a certain figure in one interview who said the following.
Because there are no resources, even as of now, even to cover the current level of salaries until the end of the year. Well, let's put it this way. When you set a goal for yourself, then you have to look for ways to solve it. So I want to emphasize again that finding resources for the armed forces of Ukraine, well, only for the defense and security forces in general, is a joint task of the government and parliament. Because...
Well, after that, basically, he just rambles on. But here they're telling us, by the way, about that very same Fedorov, who is now running against himself, is already running for president of Ukraine, not for Minister of Defense. He spent some money from the funds that were meant to pay military specialists, meaning the salaries of soldiers and officers, and he spent it on buying, apparently, drones. This is being reported, and overall it turns out to be a very interesting situation. And in light of these events, once again, the situation at the front looks somewhat different. That is, it's one thing when people are fighting and they have, well, a salary, they have some food and something to drink, there's hope for a better future somehow. And it's a completely different story if there's no money. What's most interesting is that there's no longer a clear picture of the front line. We're being told it's getting harder and harder to determine where the actual front line is.
In Ukraine, publicly available maps of the front line, like the Ukrainian deep state, no longer reflect the real objective situation of what's happening.
The reason is the change in tactics by both sides in the war with the use of drones, especially over the past few months. There really are a huge number of drones here. They're flying back and forth, and on top of that, there are also sabotage and reconnaissance groups, including drone operators moving back and forth as well. Planting flags, those very ones, somewhere 10 kilometers from the front line, planting a flag and then showing it off. This applies to both Ukrainians and Russians as well. This really interferes with assessing the current reality. But in addition to everything else, at present, the main force preventing the enemy's advance are the groups that use drones. If an assault group detects a drone group and is forced to leave its position, a temporary drone gap immediately forms in this sector and other assault groups. Everyone can generally use this to their advantage. As they penetrate deeper into the enemy's rear, the nature of positional warfare also changes. The front can no longer be imagined as a fixed line or even as a zone just a few kilometers wide. Instead, it is becoming increasingly wide, a broad mobile belt already about 10 kilometers deep.
In some areas, especially in open terrain, it will continue to expand. This is even more significant. Here, one can immediately recall how they used to say that everything was supposedly going strong.
Now, there will be new contracts introduced as well. Remember, those contracts for 18, 22, 60. In addition, not only those who didn't go, but also other Evas who are already over 60. Well, because the joints hurt, for those who are 59, they can still be recruited, but those who are already dancing like that on the threshing floor, like that, he tells us, like to a doll, those people can't because, well, their joints hurt. They can go fishing with their grandchildren. He was showing his photos there too. Not realizing how much backlash it causes, not affection. But everyone else can, and here a member of parliament is telling us about this. Let's listen to what he says. He's also talking about the catastrophe, only this time it's a financial one.
There was an experimental government decree that introduced contracts and bonuses. It was expected that some of the ideas from that experimental decree would be turned into laws. So let's do it this way. Your expectations, or I don't know, maybe you already know something, some concept regarding changes to mobilization reform from Kmara.
Are you asking whether this experimental decree on contracts will continue? First of all, its effect is almost zero because no one is signing these contracts.
So basically, no one, well, some young people signed. Someone came back without an arm, someone without a leg, someone without any limbs at all. Then they were told, guys, you'll have to pay for your own prosthetics with your own money. Not everyone, but I showed you the video. For someone who lost a leg, again, imagine you're 18 or maybe 20 years old and you lost a leg, a young man. And they tell him, listen, you had about 180,000 euros. Oh, revenues. So let's do it this way. Pay for yourself. Here's your bill. Here you go. All the best. Goodbye.
Well, there you go.
No one. Is there any statistics? What do you mean, no one?
Well, there is. The statistics are very approximate. They constantly refer to me. I get feedback from the military. So they do sign it, but very, very few do. So within, well, let's say if we're talking about the scale of the armed forces of Ukraine, and even more so the defense forces, it's within the margin of error. Sorry.
So it turns out to be just a few tenths of a percent. As he says, this signing is done by out of all those liable for military service, well, practically everyone there. Probably dozens or hundreds of people sign within an army of several 100,000. Imagine what a fiasco.
And they spent a lot of money to bring in and summon all these people, a lot of money. There was even filming there.
They hired all sorts of girls and boys and all kinds of military people who were shouting, including Ukeles himself, that they would find any position for you, finance specialist, IT specialist, drone operator, anyone. Well, after everyone found out that the best assignment for these people was the tree line and then running there to hold it, somehow people stopped running there. Once.
Secondly, this whole story works only if there is money. There is no money. In the foreseeable future, there won't be any. If, God willing, or maybe not, I don't even know, people start signing it en masse, I have no idea where they'll get the money for it.
Well, just imagine, they advertise the contracts, but there's no money to pay those who sign these contracts. Well, how is that possible? Who is supposed to be responsible for this? And why is this even being spread among civilians? And that's a rhetorical question. Obviously, you don't need to answer it, but still. And then the president tells us next that there is no dictatorship in Ukraine. Can you imagine? Let's save him for dessert. Okay. What do we have next? Well, in the Venetia region, they're writing to us that guy in Romania flew away on a paraglider, and in the Venetia region, they tried to smuggle a man across the border in banana boxes, but it didn't work out. Because I'm sure someone just tipped off the right people to the right place and even got a reward, and in the end, these guys who tried to escape spent their money and got nothing in return. At the same time, since... Look, the situation at the front is already getting worse for Ukraine, and the Kremlin, as I showed at the beginning, is preparing an escalation against Ukraine after the failure of the negotiations. The peace agreement negotiations have reached a dead end. As I said, the negotiation formats have essentially collapsed, and the two warring sides have returned to square one. Moscow increasingly sees Ukrainian strikes as attacks by NATO states, since alliance members are providing Kyiv with weapons and intelligence.
This is not the peak of military escalation right now, but overall it could happen. Putin said, for example, that you should be ready to receive a retaliatory strike against the most sensitive sectors of your economy.
Right now, the US is trying to do something. According to various sources, someone was in Moscow, either the head of the CIA or someone else. But for now, nothing is known yet. Donald Trump said that some attempts are being made to achieve peace, and he hopes that they will lead to some kind of result. But Trump is a person who, remember, we've already heard him say that our work, we're very proud of it, but it hasn't brought any results. Here it says about CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who was reported to have made a visit to Moscow, but nothing special came of it. There's practically no diplomacy, so Moscow sees few alternatives except further escalation for its military goals. They're also hoping that Kushner and Witkoff will bring new proposals. But then Kellogg showed up, that very general, ex-general I think, who said, first of all, that he believes Ukrainian women should fight because his beloved daughter, you see, fought in Afghanistan. Well, we also need to see what her actual role was there. Most likely, she was a junior assistant to the senior janitor, a clerk, and so on. Secondly, he said that Russia won't stop until they capture Odessa, the Odessa region, and some other regions. And he said something else there, too. Oh, and he also talked about his own rival, as I understood his political rival, and Witkoff and Kushner, saying that they don't understand anything about war and won't be able to negotiate anything. Just imagine how much diplomacy has declined, that even in the US, where the diplomatic corps used to be more or less strong, where now one representative of the negotiators claims that the others are worthless. But how bad does it have to be? Diplomacy has fallen so much. There used to be a diplomatic corps of negotiators. Honestly, if one of my subordinates, well, I imagine such a situation. If someone did something like that, well, I think it would be, well, that's immediate dismissal and disgrace without any benefits, without anything.
But here it's considered normal. So what, and now for Ukrainians, for civilians, not for the military, they're already predicting that the Russians will try to destroy large shopping malls in Ukraine. I mean, they're already destroying them. I don't know what this guy, this Flash, or whatever his nickname is thinking, but he's supposedly an advisor to the president, yeah. But the Russians, he says, will try to destroy large shopping malls in Ukraine, and people will have only up to 2 minutes to evacuate after being warned about the threat. And they're already trying to destroy epicenter chain stores in southern Ukraine, including Odessa. The Russians are doing this in particular because it's a warehouse store where a lot of things can be destroyed. And he tells this very person with the nickname Flash about how you need to be careful in evacuation centers. So these people are sitting there. Some have their own bunker. Some have a dacha in Concha Zaspa. Some have a villa somewhere in Italy or Spain, or maybe all of that together. And they tell ordinary Ukrainians, well, you know, if you get bombed, you have 2 minutes, right? But then there was someone else with some kind of nickname, I don't even remember which one, who was talking about 30 seconds from the air raid alert to the strike. There were 30 seconds before the strike, they were talking about ballistics. I think it was Kuleba. Either Kuleba the man said it or Kuleba the woman. In general, there are a couple of them, so it's easy to get confused. Next about the positions of the forces. Here again, Zelensky took a selfie at the Zaporizhia stele, which leads to the darkest thoughts. And he stated that the positions of the defense forces in the Donetsk region were reinforced by two groups under the command of Prokopenko and Beletsky, the most, let's say, real generalissimos, but honestly not talented ones. The head of state published a video message from Zaporizhia and said that together with Dropat, the general staff of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the minister of defense, he discussed further steps at the front.
Moreover, he claimed that he was at that very front, but again, everything there seemed a bit not quite like the real front.
First, says Zelensky, our positions in the Donetsk region will be strengthened thanks to two reorganized formations. The commanders will be heroes of Ukraine, Denis Prokopenko, and hero of Ukraine, Andrei Beletsky. Today I awarded Andrei the Gold Star of Hero.
Why PRG, a relic of the USSR, still exists and hasn't been properly decommunized is absolutely impossible to understand.
The hero's Gold Star existed in the USSR. It was such a high award and was given so rarely to people who had truly distinguished themselves in both labor and war that, in general, people looked up to them.
And now, yes.
All right. And they say there's not enough money. That's it. They're short 27 billion hryvnias. Billions, imagine. Not millions, billions. Just think how much that is. And they plan to spend this money by the end of the year, but it's already gone. It's like in South Park, I think, when Stan comes to the bank, one of the kids, one of the children involved in all this, the cartoon character. And he says, my grandma gave me $100 so I could invest in my future. The bank manager says, oh, good boy, you're thinking about your future. You're so insightful, smart kid. He takes his check, puts it in his drawer, does some stuff, and says, poof, and it's gone. The kid asks, what's gone? He says, your money is gone. Why is it gone?
Well, things didn't turn out the way we expected.
Next he moves on, there's a boy, then a grandma, same thing happens. I'm telling it briefly, again, poof, and the money's gone. Well, that's about how it goes, except here it's not $100, but 27 billion. Of course, the difference is small. But, in general, there are specialists here who can handle it. There's no money in the budget. This was stated by a deputy from the party, well, which one else? A servant of the people, of course. Right now, he says, there are no resources to cover even the current level of salaries until the end of the year. Why didn't we vote for the budget draft for 2026? Because this problem was already embedded at the end of 2025. But the deputies, in short, are not to blame for anything. That's a given. No one is to blame, everyone is to blame except them. From the very beginning, it was clear that in about 6 months, the issue of a lack of funds for the defense forces would arise, and that's exactly what happened. They're telling us about a deficit here. Zelensky also said that there was overspending in the first half of the year. Resources planned for the second half of the year were used.
He says that we have to deal with a funding deficit because of the specifics of how the defense budget functioned at the beginning of this year.
The Ministry of Defense used funds that were allocated in the budget for the end of the year. The total deficit amounts to 27 billion. This is very important for us, but honestly, I won't go into the logic of the narrative anymore, into what it contains, what messages it's sending. Well, it's all so absurd. They're pushing some kind of nonsense. For us, it's important. But damn, it's clear. 27 billion were wasted somewhere. Excuse my language. It's important for us. Well, honestly, I'm just shocked that they're describing all this with such words. And then there's this Fedorov speaking up, the one who's kind of hinting about this money. Zelensky says that it's Fedorov who's to blame for spending this money. He stated that he wants to be president there and that elections are needed. And here there's some source close to the president's office. He says that Fedorov announced a political program with 3 points. He suggested replacing Zelensky, fighting corruption, and uniting people. But he also says that Fedorov really wants to achieve all of this. He's all about being truthful, a truth teller, an activist, someone who brings justice closer, a spreader of truth, even though everyone has their own version of it and all that. But again, it's worth reminding everyone that Fedorov came with Zelensky in 2019. I still remember there was a photo back then, when Zelensky still looked like himself. He was hugging Fedorov in a white shirt. Both of them were smiling sweetly. But that was 7 years ago. Just think about it. 7 years ago, these people were walking hand in hand. One hand washes the other. And now one of them says, oh, there's corruption here. Well, come on. What is even going on here? What's happening? And to really drive the point home, well, there's a video here, not only of Zelensky,
Suddenly, President Rybaltov, it's either Latvia or Lithuania, honestly, I get them mixed up, sorry, comes out and says,
And I would also like to answer the first question, as far as I understand. There was a study that showed about 70 Ukrainian citizens are ready to come to Estonia to help and defend our country. This is a huge figure, and we are very grateful for it.
According to some mysterious survey, 70 Ukrainian citizens are ready to go and defend the Baltics. Well, I also want to ask, are they in their right mind with all these surveys? First of all, who conducted them? Secondly, maybe someone was asked, like, do you want to go abroad to find a new man? Yes, of course I do. Of course, he said he wanted to. And in the end, this is what happened. All right, let's take a look in general at the powerful leaders.
Here, for example, there's a representative who used to sell Cheburiks in the food industry, and now he's suddenly the director of the Center for Anti-Crisis Solutions.
And now, in my opinion, all the president's statements are about gaining the moral right, if necessary, to deliver a preemptive strike on Belarus.
This is the first time I see the president talking about preemptive measures in his speech. This is a warning to Lukashenko not to make any sudden moves, yes. Well, the president is still speaking kindly to Lukashenko, if you noticed.
Well, this was still during the time of the conflict with Lukashenko. Now it's all quieted down, but just so you understand how tense the situation was. And there's also Laptin, the judge's son, who was born with a silver spoon in the right place, who suddenly even claimed for a few days that he fought and posted pictures. Now he's a veteran, and this veteran somehow got some money from somewhere. One moment he's buying expensive heavy motorcycles, then he's traveling to all sorts of countries. He's allowed to leave, and it's not clear how, because as far as I know, we don't have rotation or demobilization, but the judge's son can do anything. And now he says the following.
Next, he criticizes authoritarian tendencies, especially forced mobilization. Well, let's be honest. Mobilization itself is, by definition, coercion to fulfill your duty to defend the country. So are you against that?
But apparently, he already spent those few days defending, and now it's all about his sense of duty.
The territorial recruitment center is about grabbing people off the streets, about violations by the centers, and basically hyping up this topic. Well, like, maybe come here yourself, right?
Again, the the oratory skills of this character are just endearing. He says things like, well, well, damn, so what? Come here. Which neighborhood are you from, kid? Where do they even come from? Well, the judges didn't have enough money to teach this character any, again, oratory skills to teach him how to think logically. Well, just imagine in, say, 1939, Jewish people who are outside of Nazi Germany, and they criticize, for example, that same Germany.
They are told, why don't you come here and criticize us?
Well, what is there even to talk about here? All right. I'm not saying goodbye yet. See you all. Write in the comments what you think, and don't forget to subscribe. We need to look for it.
As always, some answers. If Trump suddenly really decides not to provide Ukraine with weapons, then that's good. But we shouldn't count on that. We need to rely on our own efforts and on the support of our European allies. And again, there's the issue of our ballistic missiles.
And in the Barmouth Strait, everything is still consistently bad.